crooked sky. Your autumn breeze blows. Lovers look another side. Your heavy burden shows. Silent sleep and sisters stir, slide out of their beds. The creaking noise, your broken toys, and the voice that's inside your head. And I say, hold on, my darling, now. Hold on, it won't be long. Hold on, my darling, now. Hold on, it won't be long. Chasing time before it flies, just to break out your winter coat. Before you know, December glides with the crunching of the snow. A storm is brewing in your mind as your hands turn into fists. Just as warmth floods over your lucky clover, the scar upon your wrist reminds you exist. Hold on, my darling, now. Hold on, it won't be long. So hold on, my darling, now. Hold on, it won't be long. And though your broken diamond's goods expired, and the years have done you wrong, the emptiness in your sunken chest, it won't be long. So hold on, my darling, now. Hold on, it won't be long. Hold on, my darling, now. Hold on, it won't be long.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? I'm Ben from Universal Audio, and welcome back to yet another Office Hours. We're like this close to episode 100. This close. You can taste it. It's number 99, and this one's gonna be fun because we're gonna dive in and we're gonna talk about tape. We're gonna spend the whole episode talking about tape. Oh, and then at the end of the episode, we're gonna keep doing our plugin feature because you guys love it so much. And today, I think we're gonna focus on the Precision Channel Strip. As far as I know, this might be the last channel strip in our lineup. But the cool thing is that this is the one that's included with every Analog Classics. So everyone that owns an Apollo, you own this plugin. And if you're like me, you probably forgot that you owned it and have neglected it for far too long. So we're going to walk you through this one today and show you how it works. But before then, we're gonna dive deep into everything that is tape plugins in UAD and Luna. And to help me do that, I brought along my good friends, Matt and Drew. How you guys doing today?
Good.
Good. How you doing, man?
Doing great.
By the way, we also have a Sentry. Sentry's one we haven't done yet.
Yeah. Thank you, Drew, keeping us honest.
Yeah, I think that's the last one.
I think it might be the last one. If anyone in
Sentry.
the comments, if there's one that we're forgetting in there, let us know. But yeah, guys, man, this is a great weekend. I guess before we really start getting into today's show, just wanted to make sure people know the desktop Platinum Vocal promo is still ongoing. Still got a little bit of time left for that one. So if you buy like a Twin or Apollo Solo, you get a bunch of free plugins along with those. All the details are over at uaudio.com. And some of you may have seen, if you launched Luna already this morning, there was a update. There's a bit of a hot fix. And Drew, do you know exactly what went in today's hot fix, and why should people update their software?
Yeah, well, it's primarily a UAD side, although it does impact both because especially for 118, they're so intertwined. But yeah, there was the 560 EQ turns out was out of phase. So yeah, we had to fix that.
Minor detail.
Minor detail. But sometimes things get biased.
Yep.
But yes, so yeah, and in that sense, that's why it needed to be a coordinated Luna and UAD release because those are intertwined. And then the team also took the opportunity to, sneak a few other little things into Luna because there's always fixes getting merged in and so forth. So
nice.
Definitely do that one. Do both UAD and Luna both on the supplemental update. And the release note should be out and everything should be in your meter control panels and inside the app. So
nice. Yeah. No, just always for downloads, uaudio.com/downloads. So if you guys, we got it. Early question. This is slightly irrelevant, but Bo's asking, Drew, what microphone are you using?
This is a Sound Deluxe U195, made by David Bach, one of the mic gurus in the world, who also happens to now be part of Universal Audio. So look for more on that coming down the pike.
Nice. Oh, someone in the chat just pointed out that Century Channel. It would obviously make sense to do Century Channel Strip on our 100th episode.
Yeah, we planned that. We
knew that from the get go. That was our plan all along. Thanks for great suggestion there. But man, this is gonna be a really fun one because as we start thinking about if we're gonna talk about tape, we're gonna talk about every aspect of tape. Which in the UAD universe, that means that's a lot of them. All right, so we got Oxide, we got Studer A800, we got ATR-102. The Galaxy Tape Echo, the EP34, and of course, we almost forgot about it, but I'm glad we didn't. The Fatso, which is, while it's not actually a tape machine, it's a, Drew, I think you remember what the acronym is, right?
It actually stands for Full Analog Tape Simulator Optimizer. It's basically Dave Durr's way of trying to say take all the elements of tape and put them into a box that didn't have tape involved. So full analog tape saturator / optimizer. So that's what FATSO stands for, in case you're wondering.
Yeah, FATSO's way catchier. I'm glad they shortened that up.
yeah.
But this
it's
is
like scuba,
Exactly. So it's a question, both for you guys, but also for everybody out there in the chat. What is it about tape that you guys enjoy the most? Whether hopefully I imagine it's a sonic thing, but I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments as well. What do you guys like so much about tape? And I guess Drew, I'll start over with you, man. What is it about using tape on mixes or on productions that you really like the most?
Yeah, it fits in with the whole thing. I came up on tape and consoles and large format analog consoles and all that stuff. So it always struck me like I've always wanted the gear to help me. So that's always my MO is like I want the gear to help me because that's what I'm used to. I'm used to picking a device or something and having it not only do some function, but also actually have a sound to it and help me get to the finish line, help me get things. So in tape is one of the most amazing ways of doing that. And it's crazy. It goes from the such the subtle incremental thing, but also it can be really, transformative. And we're going to cover, all of that today. So whether it's the idea that after you laid down a take that it came back sounding a little better than it did going in, that was cool. That subtle thing was cool. Or when you're, in a mix and you go to print it to the 2-track, that was always interesting to me was we would be mixing on a console and we would try and make the song sound as good as we could, but we not taking into account the fact that we hadn't hit the 2-track yet. I used an ATR-102 daily for 9 years throughout the 90s. And it was you almost had to be a little bit clairvoyant to see, once it hits the half inch, once it hits the half inch. Yeah. So anyway, for me, it's just all a part of this whole thing where it's I want the gear to help me. I rarely choose tools that are super clean. So anyway.
Nice. What about you, Matt? What's your go-to for using tape?
Yeah, I mean, as someone that primarily makes electronic music, I mean, I think it's a great way to take like digital in the box elements and kind of bring some real world warmth to them. And depending on how you use tape, it can be an EQ, it can be a compressor, it can be a saturator, it can be a filter. I mean, it's like you can do so much with tape. But yeah, I really like it for the character it adds to kind of otherwise digital and kind of cold, harsh elements.
Hell yeah. Nice. And yeah, you guys in the comments there, you guys are absolutely nailing it. You know, it's compression, it's EQ. You know, a lot of you kind of pointing out, you know, it adds a softness, right? Or it can add a softness. Like that's kind of the interesting thing I find about tape is it's not just one thing or another. It's not just saturation. It's not just compression, not just EQ. It's that je ne sais quoi, right? It's this intangible slight modification to the sound. And one of the things I really enjoy about using it, especially inside of Luna, and I'm sure a lot of you are as well, is that the cumulative effect, the fact that you can put it on multiple tracks, you end up, at least, you know, in my experience, like I end up doing a lot less processing because everything's already kind of flattered, right? Like you can kind of take some things that already sound good, throw them through the Studer or the Oxide, maybe, you know, put the ATR-102 on your mix bus. Now you're listening through all of your signals now through tape, and you know, even if it's not hitting any of those tape machines hard, it's still just adding this little something to the sound that for me ends up being like, all right, I don't really need to EQ these guitars as much as I thought I was going to, or man, actually my mix is kind of glued together in a good way. I don't need to turn on as much two bus compression. So it's the and this is something that I wanted to talk about too, is like how do we set up our sessions to best utilize tape? Because we've got a couple of different approaches on there. But let me keep on reading through your comments here. Like Andy's saying, knock off the edges, and it feels it feels like a nice warm hug. Yeah, it does, man. Give your tracks a nice warm hug. This is so good. Yeah, especially when anything has harsh transients. Yep, absolutely. That, you know, it's something that can, you know, like the echo what Matt said, right? Especially if you're using a lot in the box elements or a lot of, you know, kind of brighter digital source sounds, like this can be the perfect complement to that, to give it a little bit of an organic edge.
Yeah, I like to use it a lot. I almost always use, when I use the transient designer into the Studer is always like, because sometimes transient designer, if you're trying to dial it in, you'll get that errant like snare hit that's like extra hot or whatever, and like the Studer kind of like, I like the way the Studer sort of partially absorbs the transient designer. So that's always something to definitely try that one out. That's one I had good luck with.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I guess, you know, this kind of brings up the question of what do these tape machines actually do? So as much as we sit here and say that it's intangible, it's hard to describe, but the fact of the matter, right, is, especially and we'll speak specifically about the UAD plugins, and we're going to be focusing a lot on Oxide, ATR, and the Studer, and especially with Ampex, the ATR-102, and the Studer A800. You notice those machines give you a lot of options, right? There's a lot of customization, whether you're choosing the tape formula, the head size, the speed, your gain staging in and out, the repro, and the bias. There's a ton of controls inside of each of these plugins that can, honestly, it can be pretty daunting, especially if you don't have experience with one of these machines. You're like, cool, what's the bias control? I'm with you. I don't actually know what it does. I just know that sometimes when I turn it makes things sound different, and sometimes I like how it sounds. But you know, so that's what these machines essentially are, what they're doing. They're sending sound through the machine, out through a magnetic head, onto a piece of tape, and then off of that piece of tape through another magnetic head, and then through transformers, transistors. The whole circuitry of these machines are emulated inside these plugins. So there's a lot of different components that are doing a little bit of something to the sound. But obviously,
and Ben, I was just going to say, and just to expand upon that a little bit, it's literally transducing your voltage into a different form of energy. You know, like we're converting voltage into magnetism, and then so it's like your sound is stored on the tape, either permanently or temporarily, depending on how you're going through the machine. So it's a change in energy. It's just as significant as air pressure to voltage, i.e. microphones, and it's just as significant as voltage to air pressure, i.e. speakers, because imagine changing from one form of energy into another. There's a lot of moving parts there, and as you said, going through these magnetic heads and different alloys and different head gaps and different, tape widths and all that stuff, it's like, it's shocking that it works at all, like it's one of those
I know,
things,
right?
You look at this stuff and you're like, oh my God, somebody thought this up, 80, 90 years ago or whatever. So it's a significant change. It's not just like going through a compressor where it's, they're complex enough, but tape is, it's next level.
Yeah. It's even more complicated. And that's, let me just hide a few of these here. So let's talk while looking at these. And Drew, which one do you think we should open up first? ATR or Studer?
I guess I would start with Oxide and Studer just because there's I guess they're simpler, and ATR is got so many more parameters.
And so, guys, what I'm going to show these using the UAD plugins just because they're a little bit larger and easier to see. But of course, as you can see inside my session, all of these features carry over into the extension version of these of Oxide Studer as well. So, but yeah, like I said, they're just a little bit smaller. So it's in this way. Also, folks, if you're not in Luna and you're just using UAD versions of the tape in your DAW of choice, everything we're talking about today will still apply to you. So yeah, let's talk about Oxide because this is I love using this one because it is so simple, right? There's not a ton of controls that you have to go after. You got tape speed. You're going between 15 and 7.5. You've got 2 EQ curves. You've got noise reduction on or off, and then it's just input and output gain. And then of course you can switch between input, which does not go through the tape, or repro, which is now coming off of the tape. So let's talk about these because these have a shocking amount of difference on the sound. The speed of the tape. So Drew, in the real world, right? This is how fast the tape would spin. But why would that have such a big impact on what people hear?
Yeah, well, it's IPS, inches per second. So like the faster the tape speed, the more actual magnetic particles are available to the head stack to store its information on. And so, which is, so technically, faster is quote unquote better in the sense that they'll be better, you'll have more dynamic range and lower noise specs and so forth. But a lot of people enjoyed 15 inches per second because of the way in which it, there's also a frequency component here and the head bump, which is, has to do with the actual physicality of the head gap and the way the tape travels across it. So yeah, the speed is one of the biggest things that is like monumental in how the frequency content will be, taken care of and or distributed across the head. So yeah,
and then then that follows into the EQ curve, right? And on Oxide, you're switching between CCIR and NAB. And as far as I remember, right, this is basically the European standard or the North American standard of the transfer, because essentially, correct me if I'm wrong here, Drew, but they couldn't actually send full frequency absolutely everything into tape. They would actually have to kind of contour it on its way into the tape and then do the reverse of that on the way out. Is that right?
Yeah, there was like a pre-emphasis curve. Well, actually, I think it was just a single-ended. What you might be thinking of. What you might be thinking of is like Dolby encoding, which had a pre-encode and an encode and a decode thing. But these were just pre-emphasis curves that attempted to take into account the natural quote-unquote limitations of the tape. So you would pre-emphasize certain frequencies such that when it did come out the other end by the nature of magnetic recording, then it would come out as even as you could. So people had to do like some preemptive calculations in order to arrive at what they hope to be a flat response,
Gotcha.
So yeah.
Nice. And then noise reduction on the Oxide, is that doing a Dolby thing, or is this just kind of a noise on and off for the circuit?
Yeah, I think it's just a noise on and off. Because it's funny. Yeah. One of the things about tape, was that the irony is that we love tape for its coloration. Meantime, back in those days, engineers were doing their damnedest to get it to be as clean and pure and linear as possible. So these are kind of happy accidents. And so we model everything, right? Hum and wow and flutter and tape hiss. But, nowadays we kind of, maybe we want to turn that off a little bit, Yeah. I personally, I leave it off for the Studer, but sometimes I leave it on for the, on the ATR, just because, I don't know, sometimes going from absolute digital black to an aggressive sound is it's a little jarring, but yeah, so it's personal preference whether you want to have that or not.
Yeah.
Nowadays.
Well, so the Oxide, this is great thing about Oxide, guys. As a UAD plugin, it's an optional plugin to purchase. But when you have Luna, Oxide is built in, and the one thing you guys will notice if you've used Oxide inside of Luna is that the Luna version of Oxide doesn't give you those controls. So this is the one of the things that you that you kind of forfeit here with using Oxide inside of Luna is you just get to add it to it. But you're going to notice here on the left-hand side, all of the presets are brought in. So you end up essentially what you can do is you can kind of drive it by using these crafted presets for Oxide, and that gives you the variety, that gives you some control over the settings. But to me, the coolest part about using this stuff inside of Luna, guys, is the fact that you have a single saturation knob. So essentially what this is doing is it's turning up the input, turning down the output, so you preserve your gain staging, and you can just hit the tape harder or less hard. And of course, in one of the recent Luna updates, the metering now accurately reflects how hard you're driving all of this stuff as well. So the harder you drive it, you'll see the VU meter just, and it really helps you with the gain staging of this stuff, guys. So like when you see your tracks kind of hitting 0 or +3, okay, I'm pushing into my tape a little bit more now. It really gives you an accurate visual representation of how hard you're going into something. So you can tell, man, is that coloration that I'm hearing, is that coming from the tape, or is it coming from, say something else in my signal chain? So now, this perfectly leads us into the Studer, where we get to dive even deeper and get even geekier about settings, because here you've got full control over your sonic palette, right? You've got tape types. So you can go between 250, 456, 900, and GP9. And so, Drew, these are all different manufacturers, different tape formulas. This is essentially it's basically how did they magnetize the tape, right? Like that was the size was the same, the thickness was about the same, but obviously there's a lot of nuance in how they could create that tape, correct?
Yeah, so like when you look at tape and then you look at the knob across on the cal knob on the right, you can kind of lump these two together for just the purposes of our discussion, and that is that in the early days of tape machines, they could only the tape formulations could only handle so much fluxivity, or nanowebers per meter. That was the unit of measure. Nanowebers per meter is the unit of measure for fluxivity. So imagine when it first came around, it was more conservative. And people were, and then as tape companies got more and more sophisticated, and they could figure out how to, use a thicker backing and then get more of the oxide to stick to the backing and blah blah blah. And they created protective covers so that they would shed less, and therefore the sound would degrade less, and so forth and so on. So like you saw this tape progression occur. And different companies came up with different things. So like the 250, I believe, is the older one, and then 456 was probably, came along, and then later on were these high output formulations like the 900 and the GP9. And so as these decades went on, as the tape formulations got more and more capable of handling more and more fluxivity, and in other words, hitting the tape harder, so the standardizations that you had in whatever in the 40s or 50s or 60s started to become pretty tame by comparison. Mm-hmm. And so therefore engineers started to experiment with, hey, well, I'm going to run this hotter. I'm going to go +3 over 250, right? Like which is what, if you look at the calibration knob on the right-hand side, that +3, +6, +7.5, and +9, those are dB over the reference level. So it allowed you to, it didn't mean the meter went further. It just meant that you were driving more fluxivity onto the tape as you went. So engineers started to realize, oh wow, these new tapes can handle more level. I'm going to hit them harder. So I'm going to calibrate my machine so that 0 dB actually was 3 dB hotter. So literally when you calibrated the machine, you would calibrate the repro electronics to be -3. And then when you calibrated the record electronics, you went back to 0, thereby being +3 over 250 or whatever the calibration you were is. But hopefully, we could talk about this for longer, but that's the basic gist of it. The basic gist of it is that tape progressed, it got better, it could handle more signal, and that's what that's all about. That choosing your tape formulations, you can go more old school. Mm-hmm. And when you change the speed, your formulation options change. And then you can choose your calibration to see how hard you want to hit it. You can think of that calibration knob as like an internal headroom screw, just like on many of our other plugins.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm seeing everything here in the comments right now. People, talking about it's going into the red bad, and we're gonna get to some demonstrations here in a little bit. Absolutely not. This is the really cool thing about tape, and especially using tape as a plugin like this, is you can treat it like an effect, right? You don't. Back in the day, you may lose a gig if you had overdriven the tape way too much and you ruined a take. There was no going back. There was like, man, if you'd miscalibrated the machine, or there were so many things that could go wrong with using a physical real tape machine, that thankfully in the plugin there's always undo. There's always you can reset the sound and get back to something. But that gives you a lot more creative latitude to experiment with kind of blowing things up and kind of pushing things to have a bit of an edge, or vice versa, playing it extra safe, but while still getting some of the tone benefits of running through a tape machine. So yeah, we'll show you guys. There's some really good times and some good examples of going into the red helps immensely with the sound that you're going for.
Yeah, it would take an hour to change over tape. I mean, like if you wanted to do all this, you couldn't. Yeah, you couldn't change tape in the middle of a session. You couldn't change calibration in the middle of a session. Like it would, you had to align the machine for that given calibration and align the machine for that given tape formulation. So
right.
It's so much nicer,
dude. Drew, you've talked about this before, but like having to go studio to studio too, right? Like you'd have to recalibrate the machine, or just deal with the fact that the machine you recorded on was calibrated one way, and then the machine you're now mixing on is calibrated a different way. There's all sorts. There was so many more opportunities.
Tones. Yeah, you'd have to print tones. At the top of your multi-track, you'd print tones that showed how your machine was aligned, so that if you did have to switch studios, you'd have these reference tones and you'd put them on their machine. And if it played back weird, you knew that you would have to align their playback electronics and then realign the record electronics to match those tones that you just printed.
Yeah,
it was a mess. It was a mess.
It sounds like I'm kind of thankful I missed that whole era of recording.
It was terrible. I would never want to go back. I would never want to go back.
Like this way is so much better. I'm getting all the benefits sonically of getting to use this stuff without any of that hassle.
Yep.
So yeah, so
100%.
tape type matters, calibration matters, the speed, IPS per second matters, input output, all this stuff matters. But of course, with the Studer, once you pop open the top, oh man, there's a whole nother set of controls. So some of these are really easy, and you'll notice like noise on or off. This is one of those simple ones. Personally, I'm kind of in the boat of like sometimes I like a little bit of noise, but often I'll get to like the end of my mixing process and crank it up for fun, and I'm like, where's all that hiss coming from? I will have forgotten to turn the noise off on some of my tape machines. So you can, of course, it's nice being able to get in there and tweak that. Equalizer curve, you'll recognize this, similar to what was in Oxide, NAB or CCIR. And then you got gang controls, and of course, when you're using the Luna extension version of this, you just have the single saturation knob that kind of does this for you. But even in the plugin version of it, this allows you, Drew, as I remember, this is a left-right thing, correct? It's not a input-output, work together. This is if you're using this on a stereo track, or multi-mono track inside of like Pro Tools or Logic.
No, actually, it will. It'll gang. You can gang multiple instantiations of the UAD plugin in Pro Tools, for example. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, it ties together. It kind of does what Luna does as far as having your A, B, C, and D machine. So you could gang together the machines. But I believe in third-party DAWs, it's just once. You hit the gang button, they all gang, and that's it.
Gotcha.
You don't get 4 machines like you do in Luna.
Understood. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then AutoCal, this essentially makes it so that as you swap between the machines, these settings over here to the left are automatically set for you, correct?
Yeah. So you want to do that if you're going to use the AutoCal, don't do AutoCal after you've already tweaked those settings to the left rather, because they'll get wiped out. Like the whole point of AutoCal is AutoCal basically takes the process of you putting up your MRL tape and doing all of your repro alignment and your record alignment. It takes all of that, which would probably take, a good tech, a good assistant, a half an hour or easy to do. It takes all that and makes it a 1-button operation,
I love that.
Yeah, but then you can tweak. But the beauty is, the moment you touch a control, like the moment you touch any control, it'll go it'll tweak. It'll go and sort of go off the ranch and allow you to tweak the other settings that are to tweak that AutoCal setup.
Nice.
Yeah, it's a good reset button. If you start tweaking things and it gets a little weird, you can always hit that and get back to where you started.
Nice. So let's quickly go through these, because this is essentially where you get to use a tape machine as an EQ, right? Is in you've got high frequency driver, sync EQ, repro EQ, and then obviously noise is kind of controlling the type of noise if you have that switched on. So let's kind of break these down. High frequency driver. This is essentially like a high shelf, right? It's going into the tape, and then it's also got the bias control, which controls a lot of different functions.
Yeah,
how
so
do you best
basically,
explain those?
Yeah, I was going to say, like, the best way to think about this is we can talk about these while looking at in conjunction with the buttons below it, because essentially this plugin has through, which is basically bypass. That's the internal bypass, and then you have input, sync, and repro. And so input is the most subtle because what you're basically emulating only the input electronics or the record electronics. So if you put it on input mode, that is not actually that's not actually modeling the tape itself. It's modeling just the input electronics. Then you have the sync, which is, tape machines have erase heads, record heads, and playback heads. And the record head, when run tracking, actually is doing double duty. It's a record head and it's a playback head. And they call it the sync head because you have to be monitoring off the sync head in order for your overdubs to line up. If you were to run a Studer in repro mode and do overdubs, the overdubs wouldn't line up with the original because you're monitoring post the record head. Hopefully that's making sense. But
it might be helpful to look at it here, right? Because this is showing you essentially how a machine would work. Is like you'd have your input head, the head that's recording to the tape here, and then you have your replay head is over here. There's time and distance between those two heads. So when you're playing back, things would be out of sync if you were using the wrong head. So that sync head is literally is it the same head or is it just right next to the?
It's literally the same head. It's the record head functioning as a playback head, but because it's a record head, it's optimized for magnetism onto tape, and therefore it's not as good of a playback head as the repro head. So if you were monitoring off of this machine, if you switched between sync and repro across all 24 tracks, you could tell the difference subtly because the specs on a sync head are not as good as the specs on a repro head. But this allows you to do both. You can actually, play around with and use the sync head, or most times you want this in repro because now you're monitoring off the play head, which has the most. It's optimized for playback. It's the repro head. That's its entire job. And this has to do with like the head gap. Like a record head has a wider head gap because it's trying to drive more magnetism onto the tape. Whereas a repro head, a playback head, has a smaller head gap because it wants to have better high frequency reproduction. So playback heads are great at playback, and a sync head is marginal at playback comparatively speaking. But we did both so that you can play around with it.
That's the rad thing is that you can select between the two. And they, again, each one of these little decisions, like these, it may feel like we're talking about a lot of minutia, right? Like we're talking about calibrations of 1.5 dB or, sync versus a repro head. Like these feel like they're very minor things, but again, they can have a massive impact on the sound, especially if you're going to stack this across multiple tracks.
It adds up. Yeah,
it's a cumulative effect. It can add up, and it can really impart a lot of character and tone to the tracks since you're using it, say, on like a multi-track drums, right? Say you've got 8 or 9 tracks of drums in your session. If they're all getting a bit of a bump from tape, a little bit of saturation from tape, a little bit of an EQ, all that's going to kind of compound on top of each other as it gets summed together. So these little things do end up mattering, and it can be quite a drastic impact on the sonics of your tracks.
So Danielle's asking, so if bouncing with repro mode, it will no. So we've removed the synchronize aspect of this. There's no we've modeled the cool stuff, but we've not changed. There's no time change like you would have in the real world. So forgive me if I gave that impression on the plugin. I was speaking about the actual tape machine itself. No worries. Use input, use sync, use repro. And everything will always maintain its sync throughout at all times. So sorry about that, Daniel.
Well, and so in this we've in talking about comparisons between the UAD A800 and the Luna version of it. Let me pull them up right next to each other so you guys can really see. So the repro head is one of those things. It's one of the least used features, as we discovered from users. So it's available in the UAD version, but on the Luna version, as an extension, that functionality, the repro head, is not there. So you basically you just got it in and out, but you still get the same tape type controls, IPS calibration, high frequency driver Repro EQ. Since you don't have a sync head, that's why the sync EQ is no longer there.
Yeah. So the repro head's there. It's the sync head that's not there. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I got that backwards.
Yeah.
And then what's cool is auto cal again, same. This carries over, and then the link inside of the extension version of it. This is where you get the really cool input output. They work against each other, so this way your gain staging stays accurate, but you're allowed to push into the tape harder. So when I'm doing it over here, if you guys have been using Luna for a while, this is probably intuitive by now, but when you're making changes over here in the focus browser, I'm now affecting the tape across my entire session. So all of these tracks are on my Studer B machine. Even though the saturation knob isn't going up per channel, they're all now being driven based on this control happening over here. And then, of course, I can come in and I can add more or less on a per channel basis using the control on the channel itself. So yeah, it's very powerful. And again, one of the main reasons why we love getting to use this here inside of Luna is the fact that this is no longer using DSP. When it's in the tape row, just like as we've been talking about a bunch the last couple of weeks with the API Vision console emulation, is you're now getting that processing offloaded from your DSPs onto your CPU, which means it frees up DSP to do other things, run more reverbs, delays, culture vultures, fatzos, other things that you want to use your plug-in processing for. The tape is just being handled. It's just kind of baked in, quote unquote baked into your tracks. Of course, you're still getting to, it's not like baking it in like you record it through the effect, but it's baked in as in like you can kind of set it and forget it. And this is, I know for a lot of folks, this is kind of, when I'm setting up a mix these days, this is kind of my first move. If it feels like a production or a song that's going to benefit from tape, I'll do this as kind of my first move in the mix is, all right, we're going to, drums through the Studer. You know what, the guitars are already distorted enough. I won't necessarily have to say every single track and bus needs it, but the ones that I kind of, have a hunch that they'll be benefited from inserting some tape on them, I'll just go ahead and get that out of the way right at the beginning. And I know, Drew, this is kind of in terms of like the process here, right? This is kind of there's two different methods, right? There's cool, just emulate the old school workflow, everything's coming off the tape machine, but then there's a little bit more pick and choose, oh wait, you know what, this snare drum needs a little bit of tape, we need some of that softening of the transients, a little EQ compression. What's kind of your take on how to set up tape machines, how to set up mixes using tape?
Yeah, it's funny, the tools that the tools dictate the workflow, I think, in some cases. So it used to be, prior to Luna, I used a lot of UAD2 in console as my last insert in console, and I would commit stuff. So I would have unison pre, I would do whatever processing, and then I would always put a Studer as in the last slot. So it went to my DAW pre-treated for tape, and that was kind of what I was used to. And I like to be able to react to the tape in the moment. So for example, I might throw the plugin on in console or now in Luna's record effects, and it might influence my mic choice. You know what I mean? So in that moment, I might decide between SM57 or the Bayer, the 122 or something and literally the tape response might dictate my mic choice. So I always liked that option, early on. But it's funny, as with Luna and having it be built into the mixer, I've started to flip that, and I'm actually taking that, that last thing, and I'm reserving it for that first playback. So now I'll mic things up and I'll do that first playback through the tape. And it's then I make those decisions, then I make those decisions and I can still react to them, but I don't have to commit to them. So that's kind of, I've sort of morphed over the years. It used to be because, most other DAWs don't help things sound good. That's one of the things I love about Luna. I just imagine that. I can't believe it's 2021 and we're, a DAW whose entire focus is to make the mix sound better, right? But we really haven't had that before that. So anyway, that's kind of what I'd always do. I would lean into it more on the input side, but now I'm starting to come around to the after side, I guess, more these days.
We got some, we're getting some great questions in here. So I'll take an easy one here first. Terrell Jones is asking, can we demonstrate how to get different tape rows like the A slot and the 2 through 4? So yeah, let me share my screen here real quick and show you guys. So with Luna tape machines, you get 4 tape slots available. And I think, Matt, we've got a video, a Luna Basics coming out about this. Is it out?
It's out.
Yeah,
Or is it just
actually,
about-
It's out.
Yeah, it just came out. I'll post the link in the chat.
Hell yeah. So there's Luna Basics that'll cover this in even more detail, but quickly I'll show you guys here. So when you click on the plus button on your tape row, it brings up the tape assignment over here in the focus browser. And so now with the tape assignment window open, this is where you can select what A, B, and C, and D machines are. So these will now be shared between tracks, but it allows you to set up, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll set up like a drum and bass, kind of the low end energy instruments. They'll get their own tape machine, but then like guitars and background vocals, give those their own machine as well, with a slightly different setting, different tape types. So to set that up, I think by default Luna will load with Oxide and Studer as A and B. So I'll often come in, I'll use C and say, hit the arrow button, and then come in here and select Studer A800, and then now I can get in here and I can tweak my tape type, tweak my IPS. So now I've got a different machine between my C and B machines with just slightly different settings, whether it's the calibration, or again, you can pull up different presets, or I can, if I wanted to change that out, I can come up here and just switch from Studer to Oxide. And then this allows you to have 4 different types of machines at the ready very quickly.
Yeah, and this is only per session. So like whatever new tape machines you set up don't carry over to new sessions. So that's something to be aware of.
Yeah,
Nice.
put it in your template. If you got a specific way you like things configured, stick it in your template.
Yep.
Larry's asking if we can commit to a tape to a track without using an insert. And I guess, Drew, that would probably be the workflow that you were just speaking about, right? Using
still
it
do
in the
it.
record effects.
Yeah, I still do it occasionally. That's the beauty of having the UAD version too. You can just put it up there in the record into the record effects slot and print it if you want. I still do that occasionally for sure.
Nice. Bjorn's asking if you insert the tape in the tape slot, is it active when you record onto that strip? No. So this is kind of the magic of how Luna's working about this, and it kind of emulates a little bit what Drew was speaking about, of like when you're tracking, you're using the in the real world you'd be using the sync head, which isn't the same sound as a repro head. So in Luna, since it's a native process, it's going to bypass the tape while you're recording, and then as soon as you're done recording, you unrecord enable the tracks. Now it's going to flow through the tape machine. So you kind of go from this like, listen to the sync head. In this case, your sync head is just no tape effect, to now through the repro head, where now you're getting the tape effect added. So that's where you can, this is a hot tip if you've got a band or you're working with an artist and they're out in the live room cutting their tracks. This is a great way to get them excited when they come back into the controller and be like, guys, just wait till you hear this on playback, because it's going to have the Studer, now it's going to have, the summing processing if you've got your buses all set up. And I think you guys saw a great example of this a couple weeks ago when we had Shakir and the band Moon Taxi on. While they're playing live, they're still going through the
It's just the input.
vision. Yeah, it's just the input.
Yeah,
So
they're
you're
just
still
hearing
getting
the input of it. Yeah.
You're hearing the preamps, you're hearing the EQ moves that Shakir did on the way in. You're hearing all that stuff. But then when we came back into the control room and played it for the band again, then you got to hear it coming through the Studer, going through the API summing, through the bus compression. Like it goes from like, oh man, that's already sounded really good, to like, holy crap, that sounds really, really good. Like, I've yet to hear an example of this where it goes from like, man, that sounded better before all the tape and everything was turned on. Like that just has not happened to me or any sessions I've seen from folks yet. So yeah, it's a great way to impress your clients really fast. Great, keeping running through these. Nice. And I know you guys want to hear some sounds, and we're gonna get to some sounds. Don't worry. Actually, we could probably maybe start jumping into some examples here. I guess the ATR-102 is kind of the last one we were going to really touch on, talking about formulas and options and features. So I guess, Drew, on the ATR-102, again, we're just kind of like stepping up another notch in terms of stuff, in terms of things that you can change about the sound. And so I think, right, the main big difference here is like you can change the head stack size. What does that do?
So the idea with this machine is like, first of all, this is a different concept than Studer and Oxide, which were the multi-track, right? Those are the multi-track recorders. You had, 16, 24 tracks. This was a 2-track. So this was a machine that just sat in the corner and, and often didn't get used until it was time to print a mix, right? So you've just got the two channels left and right. And, most people really liked this. You could do a 1/2 inch head stack or a 1/4 inch head stack. And of course we modeled both of them. The one I used most, and actually we did a 1 inch head stack too, which was, I'd never actually seen one of those in person. But the machine I used for about 10 years was a 1/2 inch, the standard sort of 1/2 inch head stack. And, but yeah, it was just like this guy's job was to just take the main left, right at your stereo bus out of your console, and you could hit this hard. I mean, and it would do something. I mean, like this was like a meaningful thing, like I alluded to earlier, like we'd be mixing and you'd have to think, okay, well, this is going to sound really good when it hits the 1/2 inch, like you literally would have to like, it was kind of cool. And this is also why a lot of consoles have like 2-track returns, because you would print your mix over to this and then play it back and have to listen back to it and be like, oh wow, that you could hear it in context. Of course, now we can just bypass the plugin and hear the difference between the two. But you have all of the same things that we talked about with the Studer. You have tape types, you have the calibration, how hard you're going to hit it, and then the head stack. All of that's in the bottom right hand corner, below the Ampex label. And here you have the same things. You have through, which is basically an internal bypass, input, which is input electronics only, no tape, and then sync and repro. So the same basic idea where you'd have a different hearing it off of different heads. And otherwise, and also in the left hand side, the NAB versus CCIR is the same thing that we mentioned earlier. These pre-emphasis curves. And then you've got all these guts, the internal guts here, which is just your record electronics up there in the upper left hand corner. So these determined, and now for us, when you're playing with the plugin, those top ones are the record electronics. They're actually shelving EQs, and they're frequency adjustments that push into the tape model. So like they actually allow you to like pre-EQ. It's like a pre-EQ before the tape simulation, and then below it, the repro EQs are after tape.
Gotcha.
After tape adjustments. So like in other words, they don't push into the model. So, and these are really like, sometimes this is like a bus EQ too, like if you just want a little lift on your master, those repro EQs are great for that.
And this, I've come to really love, bussing tracks together, so obviously I love using subgroups. If you guys have seen lots of videos where every assembly of groups I can make, I'll do, right? So I'll have my drums coming together, the bass is coming together, guitars. So each kind of instrument subgroup kind of pushing together into a group. The nice thing about that workflow now with Luna is that push them together into a group, and then on that group, I can add Neve or API summing. So like there, I'm getting a little something to the sound, right? A little bit of glue, a little bit of transfer happening there with the nonlinearities of the consoles. But then I can run that into the ATR-102 next. And I've been exactly what Drew just said. It's like I'll basically use this as like a simple EQ. Like, do I want a little more high end, a little less high end? So like if you got some really bright guitars, you can kind of just kind of trim the top off a little bit, just kind of chill it out just a touch more using something like this. And it's a really pleasing effect that you're able to get, on top of the fact that, again, you're adding just a little bit of extra harmonics to it. I can control how hard I'm hitting it, so I can go into it with a little bit of juice and really kind of push the sound a little bit more and kind of saturate. Or, again, I can play it safe and just use it for the EQ functions.
Yeah, and this one has this one has 4 tape speeds. So you get to 30 and 15, but you also have 7.5 and 3 3/4, which are really useful. And if you've not checked this plugin out, if you've not checked out the presets that Will made, in the UA effects, and I forget what they're called, saturation and effects or whatever, there's some really cool stuff in there that allow you to use this in a lot of cool, unique ways. It's a flanger. I've got my demo. I have a little demo set up where you will be able to hear it as a flanger and as a slap. So there's lots of cool stuff, and you can use it as it's really a tone shaper. I like this on drum buses. I'll use it for a particularly difficult, or if you got a particularly ornery vocal, yep. It can work wonders, because it's just so many processes all linked into one.
Yeah, and guys,
And it actually has different tape formulas for the 7.5 and 3.75 settings, which is it gives it a whole other set of sonic options there.
Yeah, you guys will notice here. So this is the tape selector right here. So you notice when I go down to 7.5 and 3 3/4, it changes out, and you get the 3590 and the 111 tape formulas are available. And those are, as I remember, those are basically consumer tapes, right? Like those weren't necessarily used in studios, but more in like field recorders or home tape machines.
I don't know.
So they've got a killer like lo-fi sort of sound to it, which we'll show off here in a second. One thing I did want to cover real quick about the ATR-102 while we have it open. Again, talking about the guts here. Guys, a lot of this stuff can feel very overwhelming if you're not used to using these controls. Number one suggestion: check out the presets, because they're incredibly awesome place to start in terms of like, you get suggestions by people like Buddy Miller, Chuck Ainley, Richard Dodd, Stephen Smith. You get some absolute experts that really know these machines, kind of giving you, kind of pointing you in the right direction, right? So you can come in here and use Richard Dodd's, 915 IPS, the setting that he listened to and loved and used on this machine. You can pull that up instantly in here. But there are a couple of cool things about the ATR-102 that we haven't seen yet, and one of those is the wow and flutter control. So this allows you to control. Tape machines weren't perfect. Their motors would kind of ebb and flow, or they'd not go at a perfect pace all the time. That would create a little bit of a pitch artifact. But of course, with this being a plugin, you can stay true to it and have it. And of course, you get some controls over how much of that is in there. Same thing with crosstalk. This would be the left and right channels kind of bleeding together, and you can turn this on or off. I love that you have the ability to do this. In the real world, there were not these switches under the hood. You could not
you were stuck with it.
You couldn't say, I want no wow. You'd have to call your tech and have them spend a day with your machine trying to figure, probably replacing the motor or something like that. But also on the Ampex 102, you get on the plugin. A few of these features are plugin only and not in the extension version, such as the transformer on and off, and tape delay, which we'll jump to here at the end. We'll have a couple examples showing off tape delay and how this can be a crazy useful feature for getting flanger, getting delays, etc. Out of a tape machine. It's a lot of settings. It's a lot of stuff and I'll be completely honest. Like I typically kind of drive from presets. I love the Stephen Miller, these mastering for the ATR-102, the ultra linear ATR, like, half inch or 1 inch presets. To my ears, like these sound so good on just about every mix. Like that's kind of the one I stick to the most.
Those are attempts at like literally taking the plugin, because this plugin you can literally manually align the controls, and so that's what best of my knowledge, that's what he did, was like basically use the internal oscillator and the internal mechanisms to calibrate these machines to these given tape things, and then storing them as presets. So you're literally like, those presets are really great at trying to use that gear like someone would have used in the day, like to have it record and reproduce as close to that to that spec as possible, to that tape formulation spec.
Nice. Well, Drew, let's give the people what they're asking for. They want to hear what some of these effects actually have in the context
well, so
of music.
You wanted to do the did you want to do the effect one first, or just a basic what are you thinking?
Let's build up here. Let's start with like the EQ, compression, saturation, the kind of the thing that most people associate with using tape plugins. Let's start with simple stuff, and then we'll get into the crazy ones in a little bit after that. So
So the session I have loaded up is this is a rock mix, and just to kind of tie all of this together, you can see that I'm using Studer on almost everything. Being able to pick and choose what is going on here. So there's that, right? So there's the multi-track side of the tape machine here. And then over here in my part of my 2-bus, I'm using the UAD plugin just because this is a session that came before the extension. And but you could obviously be using the extension itself. And so this is a classic example for me. And you'll notice that I have it in the classic spot, right? The classic spot is last in line, or in my case, with just a limiter after it. So if you're really trying to replicate sort of the old school workflow, that's what you'd want to do. You'd put it last in slot or second to last with a limiter in front of it. And so let's go ahead and hit play, and you're gonna hear it. You'll hear it with it, and I'll go ahead and close this so we get to see the little spins, the little real spin.
She said that she wanted my heart. Oh, but she just wanted my soul.
And we'll turn it off.
Our love would never part. Those were lies. She got me paying with my blood, tearing my heart, and burning my.
You know, and so
Dude,
it's
everybody
just
in the
the
chat,
glue, man.
Yeah, everyone in the chat, tell me what you guys just heard just now, because like, yeah, to my ears, it's like a glue thing. If it goes from feeling like a rough mix to a final mix in a way.
Yeah, I mean, it like literally like sitting here, it's just like it's left and right, it's up and down, it's front and back. I mean, it's literally just like I feel like it's just grabbing a hold of everything.
Yeah.
And yeah, so there's, that's the big heavy lifting there. And, and it's funny because, I know, Ben and I, we have slightly different approaches to this where like, to me, I'll add this towards the end of a mix, right? Because I don't want to quote unquote, I don't want to lean on it too much, right? So I'll force myself. It's kind of a masochistic thing here. I'll force myself. How good can I get the mix to sound without it? And then, the last 20% of the mix, then I'll pop it on there. I'll be like, oh, wow. You know what I mean? And I know you have a different approach, Ben. You like to mix into it, right?
Yeah, I'm of the mind of like, I like to kind of set, and I do this with like kind of knowing roughly what I'm going for, what genre am I in, what sort of, how much edge how much of this sort of color do I think it needs? So, there's plenty of mixes where I use no tape, right? There's a lot of modern music where like putting tape machines on every track takes me away from where I ultimately want to go. But on, like if I was mixing this song, default, Studer everywhere, ATR at the end, and then I would kind of mix into those the whole time. For me, it helps a lot with gain staging, right? So hands up out there if you guys have been kind of working on your mix, and before you know it, just everything is like driven, like all of your bus compressors are working too hard, you're saturating everything, you're like, man, like this actually feels like I got smaller. Sometimes what can happen is like if you're mixing into these things, it can really help reveal like, oh man, I'm pushing everything a little too hard right now. I need to go upstream and trim down, or use clip gain, or kind of bring some of the faders down, so I'm pushing into these tools a little bit less because it's gone too far. So I like to use it to keep my ears in check, knowing that okay, I've got these things at the end of my chain that they could overdrive if I'm coming into them too hot. It helps me judge where I'm at overall. So yeah, I love having all this stuff sort of in place and then mixing into it is my general workflow. And then of course to do what we just did of like turning it on and off. Did I actually make it better? Did I make it better or did I make it worse?
And I noticed, I saw somebody mention in the chat, about level matching, and level matching is super important. What you definitely want to do is, come up here to the top and switch the meters over to input. And that's what allows you to set the record level, right? And then when you're finished, and I always do it with VU. I don't use peak. Peak is the absolute peaks of the transients, and I'm not so much interested in that. So I never use peak. I always put it in VU mode. Yep. And then once you set the input, you can set the input to be there, and then you can switch back to output and adjust your repro gain. And you'll notice there's some hash marks here that designate like what the default calibration is. But yeah, it is important that you do that. And, somebody mentioned level matching. I mean, I don't know. I tried to make this as close as I could so that, there's not a big level jump to my ear. But it's, but you do want it to be close enough to where you can actually hear it. If there's a huge boost in level, then obviously you're not going to be able to tell the difference here. But,
well, there's also there's perceived loudness versus metered loudness too, guys. Like, that's the really kind of hard thing. Like even with VU meters or peak meters, it doesn't matter. Meters tell you one story. They tell you, electronically, like how much energy there is. But sometimes what this stuff is doing is it's changing the mid-range character, or it's pulling out more presence, which can sound louder. It can add more bass, which again can just feel bigger. Like the change in tone has just about as much effect So a lot of times what I like to do when I'm A/Bing either for myself or helping create sound examples for our new plugins as they come out is like I really kind of latch onto like what's the most important element of this mix and how's it changing? And for me it's like snare drums and vocals are kind of the two I hook into the most. Like is the vocal kind of in the same spot? Does it feel like the vocal is even? Cool. And then you may notice the guitars are jumping out a dB and a half because they're over here on the sides and they're getting a boost more so than the vocal is. But the vocal and the snare drum kind of stay in the same spot, gain and feel wise. So it makes all these things, especially with nonlinear plugins, very, very difficult to nail a perfect, gain matched thing because it is a perceived loudness more than a measured loudness.
Yeah.
Nice, man. Well, and so Drew, can we hear this one with the Studers? I'd love to hear it because you've got it cumulative. You got it across all your tracks. What does this one sound like when you take the Studer in and out of your mix?
Yeah, so let's see. Let me go back to that verse. Go back to the verse. And the only down, I'm going to option click. So you'll see them go off like that and then come back on. And they do kind of come back on, sort of incrementally. But yeah, let's see what that sounds like.
She said that she wanted my heart. Oh, but she just wanted my soul. Our love never part. Those were
A little bit of a tougher AB, due to the nature of them being instantiated and turned on and off.
Can we do a stop start on off?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
Because it's a little distracting with the in between moments.
Yeah. All right, so let's start with them. Start with them off.
I love
that.
that.
And then we could do you could do the same thing with the. Well, we already did the 2-track version. Yeah, yeah. But
Nice. So Matt, let me jump over to your screen, and I think I know you've got this is kind of what you're talking about earlier, right? Of like stuff that's happening in the box. You got a much more synthesized kind of starting point. So how do you have tape implemented on this example?
Yeah, so I got a couple samples and a bunch of Luna instruments. So yeah, it's all pretty much in the box stuff that I want to color together, make it sound a little less digital. So yeah, I'm not doing as much on the individual tracks. I pretty much have everything bus to their own buses, and then have Ampex on every single bus. Nice. And you can really hear the cumulative effect of it. So let me play you.
Do I see correctly? All of these are at 3.75 IPS.
Yeah, so we're going super lo-fi. It's like instant vibe when you set to this 3.75 setting. And I'll play around with the different speed settings and the tape types. So you can really hear the difference.
Hell yeah.
So yeah, nice lo-fi vibe. Everything kind of sounds like it's sampled off a record, even though it's all programmed. So let me take it off, and you can hear the stark difference. So yeah, much more high-frequency content going on. The drums poke out a lot more, especially with like this sample bus right here. This is like what the whole track's built around. It has this like kind of ringy, nasty high frequency stuff going on. Oh, let me turn off my group so you can hear just that by itself. So yeah, kind of buzzy, not very pleasant. And then as soon as I turn on the processing, kind of rolls all that off, makes it sit much nicer. So yeah, that's what I like tape for. I mean, it's like just great for adding instant vibe and character to something that would otherwise just be kind of flat,
Yeah. Nice. And that's you're using the slower speed. So now if you were to change the speed on your machines, people are asking, if we had to kind of describe what you would use each one of these for, obviously I go to those like really low speeds. That's kind of what really creates this lo-fi. The tape's traveling super slow. It just physically can't fit that much energy onto the tapes. So the speed, to me, like that's one of the biggest effects of like when you go from 375, 15, up to 30, the high end shift that happens in there is massive.
Yeah, it kind of rolls off the high end. It seems like there's kind of an upper mid-range bump, like right before the roll-off happens, which adds a little bit of clarity. And there's a nice little low bump too. But yeah, so that's 375, and I'll kind of cycle through the tape speeds as it plays. And you can hear once it bumps to 7.5, a lot more highs come in. There's a little bit, that mid boost kind of moves up higher a little bit. And then I'll go to 15 and 32, and you can really hear that. So yeah, this is 3.75. At 7.5, wow. You can hear highs come in right away. It has that emphasis and a little bit more of the high range. Then 15 kind of moves that point just a little bit higher. And then 30 is just real flat. I think it has a much more high frequency boost, but it's kind of less perceivable because it's happening way up at the top end.
Yeah. Dude, it has massive effects. So, and this is, for you guys there, you're playing around with this stuff at home, like the coolest thing to do, for at least what I really love to do, is kind of like get something sounding pretty good and then go through and kind of audition the tape types and the speeds and start kind of learning with your own tracks, with your own projects, what each one of these does. Because sometimes you may discover, like, even if you've been mixing into it for your entire mix, you go into the ATR-102, just switching the tape types around but leaving the speed the same, you start being like, oh, all right, I hear like the low end on GP9 is a little different than the 450, and you know what, that 250 just sound like it did something. So often it's these indescribable like shifts in tone. You're like, oh, wait, that's what I like, that's what I want. And then it's always a fun thing to come back to when you're midway or near the end of a mix, right? And just kind of like, you know what? Let me just check myself real quick. Am I using the right tape type for this mix? And you click through them real quick, and you're like, oh, actually, you know what? I thought this one was going to be 250, but actually, that GP9's feeling really good. Like, it's hard to. This is all to say, we can't just give you guys a straight ahead. Use the, if you're making this music, use this tape. If you're making this, use this tape. There is no one setting for these things that sounds perfect for a genre or for a type of thing. It's a man. You gotta be a little bit of a chef here. You gotta season to taste based on what it is that you're working on.
Yeah, it's definitely worth the types.
Yeah, I was gonna say mixing the tape types. I mean, I like personally setting everything to like 7.5 or 3.75 if I'm going for something lo-fi like this, and then mixing the tape types within that. Because for example, like on the drums here, they're pretty rolled off and pretty dull, but if I change the tape type, some of these have a little bit more high end, so it's a good way to kind of strike that balance of still having them sit well in the mix with a 3.75 speed, but I can bring them out a little bit with the different tape types. Like, yeah, so that is a lot more high end than the 456. That's pretty similar. Yeah, the 456 a little bit more mellow, a little more flatter. So yeah, I mean, definitely. The cumulative effect, you can totally hear what's going on, but then mixing things inside of that, not having everything set the same, really like opens up a whole world of possibilities.
Yeah, you're getting a lot of comments in the chat here, Matt, of like just what this is doing to the kick drum, especially like guys. Yeah, the greatest thing that these tape machines will help you with is the low end 5. Some people are asking, is there a preset or a setting that you pull up to get these settings, Matt?
I mean, this is really just the stock. So like auto cal is on for all of these. So this is just the stock like EQ and bias settings for the 3.75 speed. You can come in here and tweak them from there. But yeah, I'm just using just the stock settings for this one.
Nice. And so Matt, how often Forrest is asking, how often and in what scenarios would you prefer tape over EQs? Like, how do you make that decision?
Yeah, I mean, it's you can just like roll off the top to kind of get a similar effect, but I mean, I like it because it's not doing just one thing. I mean, it's adding a little bit of compression, it's adding that low end bump that's like, even the low end bump, I mean, you can just go in there and boost at 100 or whatever, but it's not going to feel exactly the same because it's, there's a little bit of saturation happening too, there's a little bit of compression happening too. So yeah, I mean, for this kind of music, I mean, I definitely like, I would reach for tape before I reach for EQ, and then I might boost something going into the tape or after the tape if I want. But you can get a lot of character just from the tape without doing crazy EQ moves. And then using the EQ in the tape, I mean, there's a lot of things where you can really replace an EQ with these kind of tape settings for this style that I'm going for here.
Yeah, I like the dynamic nature of it myself. Like to me, it's like yeah, I could do something similar with EQ, but then that's static and unchanging and doesn't react to the music, So yeah, the dynamic nature of it is always something that I lean towards and gravitate towards.
Nice.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I mean, even with something like programmed drums, I mean, if you change the velocity on the kick drum, you can, and then going into a tape machine, you can get a whole different sound than if you just had velocity and EQ combined by themselves. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Nice. So I've got an example here to share as well. So this is we've been talking about a lot about how this works as like a glue, how it works as an EQ, but of course one of my favorite things to use tape for is to distort stuff, is to really saturate distortion. And this is I think this example really illustrates it well. I'm gonna play the whole thing. So it's got some guitars. It's it's this kind of very spacey, vibey little track. But listen, I'm going to come in here. I'm going to tweak the saturation knob on the drum loop and the bass. Because, man, what the Studer is doing to the bass in this example is, to me, it's insane. It's such a good sound. So let me play this for you. This is kind of with everything in place as it is, and I'll crank that saturation up, and you guys are going to hear the difference it makes. Way more chill of a track. But listen what happens as I turn this saturation knob up. I'll solo them for you guys.
Oh wow.
You hear the snare, the kick, and especially the bass, right? It goes from kind of a tame,
goes from chill to it's like a little aggression knob there.
Yeah, it gets a little more pointed.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Went from lounge music to Primus. In the turn of one knob.
Right? Yeah, I love being able to get in here. So, of course I can do just the bass by itself. I could, just raise its saturation. Leave the drums as is. Maybe soften let the drums have a little bit less tape saturation, or do the opposite and just kind of blow that kick and snare up. But man, that's like that type of distortion, right? Like
that's good distortion, man.
It is.
That is,
and Bjorn's with me. Distortion on bass equals good. Absolutely. Because the cool thing is, like, man, it gives it the presence. And if you guys are, we're all mixing for lots of different speakers these days. Not everyone's got great bass speakers, right? A lot of people listen on earbuds. And one of the things that, to me, helps the most making bass cut through on smaller speakers or earbuds or Bluetooth speakers is saturation. It's adding those upper harmonics. So even on stuff that's supposed to be clean, you guys adding some tucking a little bit of that color into your sounds, that's what really helps it jump out of the speakers and helps it translate across multiple different systems. So yeah, here I'll play the whole thing again, and then I'll do the complete on and off. So you guys can hear just again the cumulative effect that this is having across the whole mix. Now off. Now back on. Just like the power of the mix, right?
Oh yeah, it's nice.
It goes from being it's overall it's soft, but this adds a little presence, a little bit of a push to it. That when you take it away, you're like, all right, well, it feels even if it goes from tame to tamer,
Yeah.
It's funny if you're not using these tools, you're working too hard. Man, that's I love hearing you guys hearing these demos is like it's super cool to see what like the impact it has on stuff.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
And I'm glad people got my Primus reference. Thank you for getting the Primus reference.
Nice. Well, so there's a couple other special effects. We're pushing up on time here, but I do want to cover at least one or two of these kind of special effects. So I guess Matt, do you have something to show off that kind of the analog bit crush sort of thing?
Yeah, I got a couple things in this demo I have up. I can show you one example of it. It's a little more subtle, and then I have a more extreme example too.
Well, so and we're saying quote unquote analog bit crush. What we're really talking about here, right, is the bias control and kind of
Right.
starving.
Yeah.
So essentially, what this does is it starves the machine, and you get this weird chattery strangeness that comes into the sound. So yeah, how do you have this set up?
Yeah, so for this one, you'll hear more of like just the saturation kind of bit crushiness on the highs. Then I have another one that we can really hear the gating that happens. So yeah, this is just the sample bus that I have in my session here with the settings I was showing before, 3.75 speed and 456 tape type. So to make it super obvious, I'll crank up the record level a little bit, and then I'm going to play around with the bias knob. So yeah, you can hear as I bring it down, I get into this kind of bit crushy range. Yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not really distortion. It has this kind of like ring modulation effect too. But it's like does this really, really interesting thing to the high frequencies that, and depending on what you feed into it, it'll do different things. But yeah, it's super interesting effect that you don't really get out of many other processes.
No, totally. And so yeah, on the ATR-102 and also on the Studer A800, you can those are the two that you have control over the bias going into them. So with Oxide, you'd be running these from presets, but with either one of these two, this gives you the bias control to drive or you kind of starve it of energy.
Yeah, and I find bringing it down to like the kind of first half range of the bias knob, is where we really get this effect. So here's the Ampex on the master bus of a different project, and you can, as I crank the bias knob down, you really hear the chatter and like the gating thing that starts to happen. Oh, got caught by that spacebar thing again. Sorry, let me turn my cue up real quick.
Turn my cue up. Oh. Ooh.
So like with that kick drum,
Uh-huh.
you can hear it like it pops in and it's really just bit crushed and yeah.
You can automate
ring
this
modulated.
too. So, yeah, you can do this
and then it
during
kind of
the, you can
quickly,
automate it
sharply
down.
cuts out.
Yeah,
Yeah, and you can automate the
Automate it
bias
down.
control on the Ampex, which is awesome.
So yeah, using that on like a
Yeah.
drum group. I've used that before on like you can almost use like a gate effect, guys, for like the snare drum. Like if you you have your drum group or do like a parallel thing with that, throw it in there, starve the bias knob, and you'll find that like just the kick and snare can just poke through a little bit, but then when they poke through, they don't come through clean. They come through a little messed up in a really cool way. And if that you're kind of blending that in with another like a clean version of the drum tracks, it can be a really powerful effect.
Yeah. Yeah, here's you can probably hear it a little bit more just on this drum bus by itself. Let me isolate that. Spacebar again. All right, here we go.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you can hear like once the kick drops below a certain level, it just kind of like completely drops out. Same thing with the snare. And yeah, get really cool stuff out of that.
Oh, that's super rad. Well, I saw someone called this out in the chat of using it for like a delay, like a slap delay, or also like a double track or a flan. Like basically these are all kind of like short delays. Tape machines were really, really good at doing those, right, Drew?
Yeah. So this I have a demo here where I've got a couple things set up. We can talk about the delay first. So, if you look in the GUI, we have over in this area we have the tape delay area, and you have a on off and wet dry, and then your levels. And this is a really great sounding delay because not only it's a slap, but you have access to all of the tapes and all of everything that we just said before. So you can really tailor the sound to it. So you'll notice that I have the high frequency repro pulled way down because I don't want, you want your delays to kind of go into the background a little bit. The other thing I'm doing in this particular case is I'm sending to my reverb. My lead vocal is here, and I'm sending to the reverb from the slap. So it's kind of like I'm using it as pre-delay, but also a slap and pre-delay. But anyway, yeah. So let's let me see where I'm at here. Let's go to this verse. So it's really nice. It's really nice. And actually, I have a couple things going with this one. I'm also running this vocal through it at 375 to function as a little bit of a de-esser. So,
Okay.
yeah. So lots going on this one, but
Yeah.
I really love the ATR. Man, really sends stuff out to the sides.
That's
and then
what I
sending it
noticed
into the verb.
instantly. It's like you hear it slapping over here, but then it's also verbed a touch. Like it creates this distance and space around the vocals. So the clean version of it, right, the dry right up the middle lead vocal, that's super clear and easy to hear, but you still have got some sauce around it.
Yeah.
Every time that you push on the door, you're a witness to feel this so damn good. You want it.
So here's a little de-esser.
Goes down so smooth that you wanna move, but you're not running.
So without the ATR, this is directly on the track.
It goes down so smooth that you wanna move, but you're not running.
So if you listen to Down So Smooth, I'm purposely trying to just sort of roll those off a little bit.
It goes down so smooth that you wanna move.
You could argue that it sounds better without.
It goes down so smooth.
I mean, it's certainly more hi-fi, but if you're trying to tuck something and give something just a little bit of, pull it back into the mix a little bit, then you could argue that sounds, that sounds better to be a little bit mellower like that.
Yeah, dude, it makes a huge difference. So like, yeah, man, I think we're doing a great job here of like showing all. There's so many different ways to put tape into this. So you got a flange one set up here too, right?
Yeah. So this one's interesting. It's just just a simple tape flange. And so just for clarity's sake, I'm gonna mute the other ones and turn this on. And
it goes down so smooth that you wanna
a little over the top, but you get the idea. I'm just trying to show it. Let's tuck it in a little bit more.
'Cause you've got a taste for the bad, for the bold, for the wicked.
Let's settle that up a little bit and put the echo back in.
And every time that you push on the door, you're a witness to feel this.
So if we really have, I'm using this guy.
You want it big.
Using it as many ways as you possibly can get. I'm using it as a sort of lo-fi de-esser saturator directly on there, and then a slap / pre-delay into the 480, and then also a flanger.
So how do you set up the flanger? I gotta know, like what, because a flange
it's based on it's based on the wow and flutter.
Okay.
So yeah. So let me So like let's open this guy up, and so there's the wow and flutter is on. And then you need to have it be, and you can control the amount of the wow and flutter.
Gotcha.
Here in the tweaky area.
And then,
so yeah, just based on like the old school.
Using just a little bit of the delay too, right? Just like a little 10 milliseconds on one side and on the other.
Exactly. That's what gives it the width. Yeah. Yep. And that's what flange is. Flange is modulated delay across the entire frequency spectrum, as opposed to phasing, which is a phase inverted bandpass filter that's sweeping in different, per pole. So it's it just kind of creates that sweeping comb filter effect across the entire frequency spectrum.
Man, that's so cool. So earlier beginning the broadcast, we brought up a lot. There's even more tape plugins that we're not going to be able to get to today, but we can definitely do a follow-up show, because I saw a few requests, people asking about the Fatso specifically. That
deserves a deep dive.
It does. It really
does.
Yeah. That's going to go into I'll go into the queue to get deep doven on. Deep divin.
We better check with a linguist there.
Exactly. We'll get the grammar police involved. But man, this is ATR. So today, obviously, we're focusing a lot on the Studer A800, the ATR-102. and Oxide, and all of those three machines you can use as UAD plugins, like we've shown in a bunch of these examples. We can also use them as extensions inside of Luna. And it really is one of these indescribable things, and we've done our best to try to describe what these are doing and how they can have an effect, and show you guys some examples. But there's really no better way to get comfortable with what the possibilities are here than to try it out for yourselves. To try it on some of your mixes. If you're looking for material to try these out on, there's a whole bunch of Luna sessions now available inside the app. We just released a new one with the API Vision. That's a Cold War Kids song. It's incredible. You guys gotta go check that one out.
Fun.
And if you're not aware where these are inside Luna, just go over to you'll see a thing here right on the front screen. Open Artist Sessions. Click on that. That opens up the Discover tab inside the app, and then over here on the right hand side you'll find all the Luna sessions. So we've got Cold War Kids. We've got Everyman by Louis Cato and Fab, which was an incredible live stream series that we put on. So the final mix session of that is here. Shakir King with the K Club doing the song Side Hustle. Again, a lot of these, what's really cool is that not only do you get to see the session files here inside of Luna, you can download these, you can save a version, make your own mixes, you can go in there, and these are a great way to discover how these all these tape extensions operate. Because you don't have to worry about the music and the production, that's all taken care of. So you can really use these to focus on learning these tools. And then of course with these ones, there's live streams to go back and rewatch and learn about the process. So like Shakir King, you can see over the course of 2 or 3 broadcasts how this whole song came together. Similarly for Greaves, if you want a little bit of a hip hop example, there's Greaves, and this one I'm partial to it because I mixed it. We got Atticus Ross, and of course we got Shakir King and Cass McCombs, the very first Luna session that was ever available. So make sure you guys are taking advantage of these incredible resources to download and have just professionally recorded tracks that you can learn and really absorb a lot of all the stuff that we're showing you guys here on the show inside of there. And I guess let's round it out, right? Talking about tape. So this is hopefully a good primer for you guys to kind of start thinking about tape, how you can use it, how you can apply to your mixes. But of course, we don't want to leave you guys hanging because I know you guys are all really love our deep dives. So today we're going to dive into one of the last channel strips right before the century, the precision channel strip. So this one is the really cool thing about this one, right, guys? Everyone with an Apollo has this available to them. This is one that's included with Analog Classics, and it's a super powerful EQ and compressor and gate all put into one. So Drew, I think let me share your screen here.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's not a gate. It's just EQ and compression, right?
Yeah, just EQ and compression. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
None of that side of it. Oops, sorry. Sounds that. Yeah, so this one, we wanted to cover this one because so many people are, like you said, Ben, not a lot of people are aware that they have this, and it sounds great.
It sounds really good.
And it has it sounds really good, and it has some cool features, So let's just starting left to right, we've got this big, really super satisfying GUI happening over here on the left with our 5 bands. And as you would expect, each band can be turned on and off or bypassed separately, which is very handy just by clicking on the badge at the top. Your typical low end is going to, we're giving you the option of shelf, and then a peaking type filter, or bell type, kind of, you can see with the icon right here. And then if you keep going all the way to the right, it ultimately will turn into a high pass, right? And then of course you get your frequency control here. One of the cool things you'll notice about this plugin throughout it is that like every band goes 20 to 20. So
the flexibility of this one, that's the thing that's really blown me away about this one, is that every band can be from 20 hertz all the way to 20K. There's no limitations around it. But it's also kind of nice, like this is, it's a fully parametric EQ, right? So you guys can, it's not fully parametric because you don't have a Q technically
I guess,
it's a
and really at
semi-parametric.
that point it's the slope of the shelf and which creates undershoot and overshoot. So I think most people wouldn't consider that. I don't think you have to be considered. I don't think you have to have a adjustability of slope on a shelf to be considered fully parametric. So I'd call it fully parametric, I think.
Yeah. But it is cool that each band can kind of overlap, so you can really create some crazy sounds. But most importantly, the biggest thing I love about using this one, since I think it was Tom Waterman that turned me on to this last year when we were doing some office hour shows, is that you listen. This is a listening man's plugin. This is a
Yep.
turn up the gain, find where you want to operate, kind of pick what shape you want for it. This requires you to use
Sweep,
your ears.
yeah.
It's a sweep around. It's really find the sweet spots. And we got a good question here from Bo's asking: is it a colored or a clean EQ? And I guess it's clean, right, Drew?
Yeah, it's clean. Yeah,
Very
yeah. I mean,
clean,
it's it's clean. It's but not I mean, I don't want to characterize it as bland or as in it's clean like a Massenburg EQ is clean. It's like super high precision. Super high precision. If you're thinking like this some stock DAW EQs that are quote unquote clean but sound kind of nasty when it's not that. It's like it's super precise, super pleasing even at extreme settings. So clean in that sense. In that way.
Nice. So each band, you've got control over the shape and the cue, the high whether it's a high pass, low pass, or high shelf, low shelf, frequency, and then gain, and that's essentially about as straight ahead of EQ as you can possibly get, right?
Yeah, super straightforward. High pass very often, and then the ability to either boost above that, or and I said, as I mentioned, individual band bypasses. If you want, command clicking puts things back to their default. If you, as you're, or toggles between two different states where you had it and where it came from. And basic 5-band, parametric EQ here on the left-hand side. One thing that's unique about this plugin is your master EQ bypasses over here, off on the right-hand side, along with your dynamics bypass. And you'll notice this is kind of unique that they have their own volume knobs. They have their own, and the reason for that is because just like every other plugin, you want to and need to gain stage through this plugin appropriately, and because of this button right here, right? Because of this button which toggles the signal flow, dynamics to EQ or EQ to dynamics. Because of that button, you very well might need, and it often need, individual control of what the level going through each distinct area is. So let's say, for example, you've got a sound that's pretty anemic. It's hot, but it's anemic, and you're putting a lot of energy into it, multiple large boosts. Well, then that is going to feed into your dynamics pretty hot and could put the controls that you're used to, things like threshold and so forth, out of whack. And so by having a dedicated volume knob for the EQ, I could back that down a little bit and therefore feed the dynamic section the appropriate level that I would like to do. And the reverse would be true. Maybe you're doing some heavy cuts and you're knocking down some level, and you need to make sure that you're pushing up a decent amount into it, and so forth and so on. So that's kind of unique in that sense. There on the right hand side.
And so the EQ, and by default, right, it goes EQ into the dynamics. So kind of how you see it. So, and this is it makes sense, right? If you're going to do, especially if you're going to do a high pass, low pass, if you're going to be making EQ moves, you kind of want those to influence how the compressor listens and, how it's going to react. But of course,
that's what I do most of the time. I don't know about you, Ben. You do that most of the time as well?
I guess it really depends on what I'm going for. But yeah, I think almost, so you guys, I've admitted to it. I'm a huge SSL E-channel user most of the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, by default, I believe that one is filters, compressor, then EQ, correct? And then, so I'm usually, I think, EQ after compression, since I'm addicted to that plugin. But it really depends on what it is you're trying to accomplish with your compressor. So in this case, especially if I'm doing something a little bit cleaner using the precision channel strip, I'm going to be shaping, doing my high pass, kind of cleaning up the low end, adding my mid emphasis as I like it. And then I'd want the compressor to be reacting to the sound that I like. which is its default. But of course, there's the button there,
Right.
the dynamic to EQ, that allows you to reverse that and go compressor, then EQ.
Yeah, yeah. And then so you also have, while we're there to the right of that, you've got, this changes the meters, right? So you can look at the input and the output, figuring out, and that combined with the signal flow buttons we just talked about and these level controls can really help you to figure out exactly that you're coming into and going out of this plugin appropriately. And then one of the coolest things about this that I really dig, and which makes this that a lot of people will like for quick and easy use, is this right here, this auto gain. If you're, we have this in the API, we have it in the SSL channel strip, and this is, but you don't see it often in some of the more utilitarian type stuff, which I guess this falls into that category. But auto gain's great in the sense that it just takes that whole out of the equation. It takes the gain staging out of the equation. So as you lower the threshold, and as you dig in, and as you start to do, the appropriate amounts of gain reduction, which by the way are shown right in here, this little GR right there. The gain reduction is shown in this little bar, downward facing bar graph there. So yeah, when it's an auto makeup gain, then you don't have to think about that. You can just sort of drop the threshold, and the plugin calculates what that is. And which is super handy. And as far as the rest of the controls, we have standard attack and release. Although the attack gets pretty darn fast. The attack gets down.
This one can be really fast. And again, guys, this is such a utilitarian tool. So this is one of those ones that if you just need to get a little tone shape, a little bit of compression happening, this is a great one to go to because you have full control over all these things. It's also we don't want to forget, this is a fairly low DSP plugin as well. So if you're dedicating a lot of your DSP to say getting some Neve preamps or doing some coloration with your plugins, and those are eating up a lot of DSP, but you still need to do some tweaks to a track, this can be a go-to for, I just need to knock off a little bit of energy on a snare drum or something like that. This is a great one to pull up because again, attack release, they're fully variable. You can get super fast on both of them, and I also love the ratio as well, fully variable. So you can go all the way. You can be incredibly subtle, right? You can I think you can actually basically go 1-to-1. So be doing almost actually no compression to now just a real subtle, gentle thing all the way up to limiting.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So this is, and honestly, that's basically it. I mean, there's not much more to show other than possibly, just the total bypass.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. The total, the master bypass, as we say, in addition to all the others. But yeah, so this is
honestly the easiest deep dive out of all of them. This is
I know, yeah.
We've covered after doing DFC, after doing 88RS, some really complex ones.
Yeah.
This one feels and truly is like it's a nice, easy, simple, very straight ahead EQ compressor.
But don't let that discourage you from trying it, because it has a sound, it has its own functionality, and it's beautiful and sounds great. So definitely check it out if you haven't seen it, because everybody owns it. Basically, everybody owns this.
And it's super low overhead. Only uses 3% of a DSP chip or something. So
yeah.
If you're looking for a good, just no nonsense EQ compressor that you can use on everything without having to worry about DSP usage, this might be it.
Mm-hmm. See, I saw a few comments in there. People asking, "Hey, could we get this integrated like the API Vision channel strip?" Guys, that's a great suggestion.
That is a great suggestion. Yeah.
Hit the feedback
place
button
for those suggestions.
I know. If there was a place to gather, all joking aside, definitely hit the feedback button, guys. I know that everyone's really excited about getting. I've seen so many amazing reviews and positive feedback from you guys out in the community around the API console and how that's getting integrated. So if you want to see something like Precision channel strip integrated in there in the same way, hit the feedback button. That lets the product designers and the engineers, it lets them know what you guys want to see in Luna. And it's as anyone who's been hanging out with us here since Luna launch, you guys have noticed they really do listen to that feedback, and it really helps them prioritize what we do next with Luna based on your guys' feedback and what you guys need. I see Funkmonk's asking for SSL first. See, you guys gotta let the dev team know. Let them know what you guys want to see Luna tackle next.
Hey, he also mentions the precision reflection engine, which we're not showing today, but definitely he's got a great point on that one. That is a super. If you haven't tinkered around with that, that's a good one too. Definitely
Yeah.
check that one
Yeah.
out.
Precision
Lots of cool
delay
sounds
too.
in there.
Another killer one.
Yeah, precision delay. Yeah.
We'll have to we'll keep on adding these to the checklist of more things to deep dive on. See that one I don't have to get all complicated with.
Sentence structure.
I love it. Well, guys, man, it's been really fun, kind of geeking out around tape, and there's so much more to it. But again, I can't stress it enough. Like the tape is one of those things that's just it's best experience. Kind of opening up a session and getting in there and tweaking on it yourself and building up that mental repertoire of like when should I be driving the A800 to get a tone versus throwing a distortion plugin on? Like when should I use the ATR-102 to do an EQ move instead of pulling out a precision channel strip or something like that? Like there's so many considerations and nuances about when you pick one thing over another that we can't just give a blanket, all right, always use this setting, always go here, always do that. That just does not exist in audio and mixing and music. It's all about kind of your experience and you're using your best judgment in the moment to pick the right tool to accomplish the sound that you're looking to get. And it comes down to experience. It comes down to knowing these tools. And me, Matt, and Drew, like we've been using these ever since we could first get our hands on. Like the A800 was one of the first UAD plugins I ever bought back before I even had an Apollo, and like that was, man, like it was a total game changer in terms of like, oh, this is what tape machines actually sound like. Roger, got it, understood. And like after you use it for a few years, you really start knowing, oh man, I love what it does to my snare drums. I love what it does to the overheads, and you start kind of learning what you like on what type of tracks and what results you can pull out from it, what presets you like. There's so many ways to approach using these plugins that our hope, with doing these on the show like this, is to just give you guys a little bit of a taste of what they can do. And then, I hope you guys go out there and try it for yourselves. And of course, if you have any questions in the meantime, there's multiple ways to get in touch with us. You can find us over on social media, of course, Instagram, Facebook. You guys will see you'll see Drew kind of in the comments on a lot of those, but also a great resource is UAD Forums, uadforums.com. You can head over there. It's a whole community and discussion group just around UAD and Luna and all things Universal Audio. So yeah, if you guys are ever looking for ideas or opinions, that's a great place to find constructive opinions. It seems like a very positive community overall.
Yeah. Lots of positivity over there for sure.
Yep. And of course, guys, if you want to have your music featured in the opening countdown, hit us up. Send us some MP3s to live@uaudio.com. We're always looking to feature music from the community on there. And for the photos, just hashtag Universal Audio on Facebook or Instagram, and we'll find them. And I think that's everything. Like, subscribe, make sure you don't miss any of these shows. Next week is Memorial Day on Monday, so the 100th episode will not be next week. It'll be the week after next. And so far, I know that we're going to do the Century Channel Strip. If you guys have got suggestions for other things you'd like to see us do for the 100th episode, there's some posts over on social media. Drop a comment on those and let us know what you'd guys like us to do for the Century episode. Besides just doing everything with Century Channel, we could do I could spend hours on Century Channel Strip. That one's my jam.
Yeah.
Yeah. So guys, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. Pleasure as always hanging out, and we'll see you guys back here in 2 weeks. Rock on.
Right on. See ya.
Peace.